Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, where we discuss infamous cases of death and murder that have an element of food to them, and then we cook or sample the food from the case. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. What do you think of when you hear the word mafia? I bet I could guess some common things. Gangsters with Tommy guns, nice suits, Italian restaurants, and lots of violence. A lot of us are interested in the mafia, and as I've learned more about that lifestyle over the years, something has become very clear. The majority of the famous mobsters made their way to the top because they were smart and cunning and willing to kill if they had to. But there are mafia guys who were absolute monsters. Some of these men were vicious, evil, heartless killers through and through. And then there's Roy DeMeo. He was in a class all by himself. A cop once said about Roy DeMeo, "What Henry Ford was to automobiles, Roy DeMeo was to killing." Not only did he do it better and more often than most, he was a master at getting rid of a body. Roy DeMeo was born in 1940 in Flatlands, Brooklyn, and began working as a loan shark when he was just in high school. He also worked part-time at a local grocer where he was trained as a butcher. Why are the worst ones always trained as butchers? Right? Roy's brother was killed in the Korean War. His father died of a heart attack when he was only 19, and then his mother took his younger brother and went back to Italy, leaving Roy alone. We know that people who find themselves without a family often find a street family. Sometimes they find a criminal family, and that's what happened here. Roy started out with the Lucchese crime family stealing cars, but he then switched over to the Gambinos, where he worked as a loan shark and an enforcer. He soon started his own small crew. They sold pot and worked as loan sharks and moved car parts. As his business grew, Roy ended up financing several legitimate businesses, and soon he was making some real money. He then realized how easy it was to get rid of anyone who created an obstacle for him, and once he began killing, he didn't stop. One of the first known murders DeMeo committed was in June of 1975, where he murdered Andre Katz, who had betrayed DeMeo. When you learn about Roy DeMeo, he seems like one of those guys where once he figured out how easy it was to kill somebody, he was like, oh, well, that's the fix for every problem. He did not have any humanity in him. If you listen to the cops that worked in the gang units back in that era, they talk about gangsters and then they talk about Roy DeMeo. He was like the worst of the worst. Roy purchased a bar on Flatlands Avenue that had been used by gangsters as a hangout for quite some time. It was known as Phil's Lounge in the 1960s, but then DeMeo bought it and turned it into the Gemini Lounge. It wasn't so much a social club as it was a place where Roy could hang out all day as people who owed him money brought him payments. It was essentially his office. In the 1970s, DeMeo gained a reputation for being a disposal man. He collected a crew of members that were all experienced in murdering and dismembering victims. The crew got so proficient at what they did, and they did it so often that they created a very strict set of guidelines on how exactly to kill, cut up, and get rid of a body. This set of guidelines became known as the Gemini Method, named after Roy's bar and the place where he was guaranteed to be found most of the time. The Gemini Method went like this. A person was lured to the side door of the lounge and into the apartment in the back portion of the building. Once they were inside, Roy DeMeo would approach the person with a silenced pistol in one hand and a towel in the other. He would shoot the victim in the head and then catch them as they fell with the hand holding the towel. He would quickly wrap the towel around their head like a turban to minimize the mess from the blood. Immediately after that, a crew member would stab the victim in the heart to stop it from pumping more blood through the gunshot wound. The victim would then be stripped of clothing and dragged into the bathroom to be drained. Once drained, the body would be laid out on plastic sheets in the main room to be dismembered and packaged up. They were like a crew of Dexters. They had this very specific method that they used to kill people, and they were good at it. The body parts would be put into bags, placed in cardboard boxes, and sent to the Fountain Avenue dump in Brooklyn, which has so many tons of garbage delivered daily that the bodies weren't usually noticed. It is estimated that around 200 people were killed and disposed of this way. I accidentally started a debate on my TikTok page about whether or not pirates are serial killers. I believe that they are. I believe that if you kill people over and over and you have a method of killing them, that makes you a serial killer. A lot of people feel like because they're killing for profit or gain, that means they're not a serial killer. And I guess if you want to get technical about it, they maybe do fall into some subcategories. But if you have a method of killing people and you do that over and over, you're a serial killer. And I feel the same way about mafia people. I especially feel that way about Roy DeMeo. Roy DeMeo's career continues as a gangster. He owns peep shows and imports pot, but he's not yet a made man. He's not officially Cosa Nostra. When Paul Castellano becomes the boss, he doesn't want DeMeo made. He sees him as a killer and a thug, and if you know anything about Paul Castellano, he fancied himself a much better person than those who did his dirty work. Roy DeMeo was just a little too dirty for Big Paul. So DeMeo enters an alliance with the Westies, which is, of course, the Irish version of the American Mafia. DeMeo does some good work for the Gambino crime family with the Westies, and DeMeo does eventually get his button from Castellano, but he was ordered to get permission before doing any killing, and he was also ordered to stop dealing drugs. Well, DeMeo didn't listen at all. He continues business as usual, but he is able to steer clear of serious retribution from the bosses for a time. He even ingratiated himself to Paul Castellano by carrying out a series of murders known as the Ippolito murders for the boss. By 1982, the FBI was investigating the huge number of missing people linked to Roy DeMeo. Some of those people had been found in the garbage dump. Paul Castellano didn't like the fact that this guy, who he already saw as unhinged and dangerous, was being so closely investigated. The FBI placed a bug in the home of Gambino family capo Angelo Ruggiero, and that bug picked up a conversation between Ruggiero and John Gotti's brother. They were heard saying that Paul Castellano wanted Roy DeMeo dead, but he was having a hard time finding someone who would perform the hit because DeMeo walked around with what they called an army of killers. A gangster named Frank DeCiccio ends up taking the contract, but when he can't get DeMeo, he started to work on some of DeMeo's own men. You know, there's always a lot of talk in the mafia about honor, and this thing of ours, and we keep it quiet. But if you really look into the mafia and study it over a period of time, they all end up turning on each other. There always seems to be people in the crew that are willing to kill the guy in charge. Roy DeMeo gets even more paranoid. Word gets back to him that Paul Castellano isn't happy the FBI is looking at him so closely. And his son later reported that his dad got to the point where he would walk around actually holding a gun, a loaded gun, under the leather jacket that he wore all the time. It wasn't even just on him somewhere, he was actually holding it. He was convinced, and he knew his days were numbered. On January 10th, 1983, Roy DeMeo went to Patty Testa's house. Patty was a member of his crew for a meeting with men. That was really the last anyone saw him. That night, he failed to attend his daughter Dion's birthday party, which made his family suspicious. That was something that even in his line of work, he would normally attend. His son Albert later found Roy's personal belongings like his wallet, his watch, and his ring in his study, along with a pamphlet from the Catholic Church that somebody had written some numbers on. At this point, the family was very concerned. Roy obviously wouldn't go anywhere without his wallet. 10 days later, on January 20th, DeMeo's Cadillac was discovered in the parking lot of the Varuna Boat Club in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn. The car was towed to a police station where the members of the Mafia task force began to search it. When they opened the trunk of the car, there was Roy DeMeo, partially frozen with a chandelier sitting on top of the body. He had been shot multiple times in the head and had a bullet wound in his hand, which investigators concluded was a defensive wound inflicted as DeMeo instinctively put his hand up to shield his head from a bullet. The task force theorized that DeMeo had been set up by his own crew. Later on, a gangster turned state's witness said that DeMeo had in fact been killed because Paul Castellano and others believed he would not be able to stand up to the legal charges he was facing regarding the stolen car ring he was involved in. They knew he was going to go down for those charges, and they didn't want him talking, so they had him killed. Paul Castellano was later indicted for ordering the murder of DeMeo, among other things. And then, of course, Big Polly ended up dead in front of Sparks Steakhouse. That was the very first case I ever covered here on this channel, and oh, was that video a shit show. When I tell you I had no idea what I was doing, spoiler alert, I still don't. Roy DeMeo will always be remembered as a vicious killer, a heartless man who murdered human beings like you or I would swat at a bug. An associate said of DeMeo, "There was always something off about that guy. He wasn't normal, and you didn't want to cross him, that's for sure." Now, as we always do here on this playlist, the flagship playlist, Dining with Death, we talk about the location that is at the center of the events. The Gemini Lounge was very much a locals bar. It was a place where a guy could stop in on his way home from work and get a drink and decompress. It wasn't a fancy place. I couldn't find any photos of the inside of the bar, but according to people that remember it, it had a long wooden bar with a television set over it and tables where you could sit. The building is now a church and has been for quite some time, which I find a little odd if those walls could talk. I mean, think about it. Hundreds of people were murdered right there behind that wall and then cut up in the same spot. It's just, it's a little eerie. It had a jukebox and a small wooden dance floor where young couples did the hustle on Saturday nights. They did have some bar snacks and, of course, lots and lots of cocktails. So stay with me right now because we are going to make food from the Gemini Lounge as we go dining with death. Oh, how I wish this was more exciting for you. So I first started looking into 1970s bar snacks. Believe it or not, I was not old enough to go into the bars in 1970s. I know I'm the oldest person on the planet, but I'm not quite that old. Everything that came up was the same thing. So I kept digging. I'm like, there's got to be something better than this. There's got to be something better than this. There isn't. Roy DeMeo owned a bar, and back then, this is what the bar would have served. Beer nuts, and they would have been sitting out in a bowl like this for people just to come along and put their hands in the bowl, and then the next person puts their hands in the bowl. I don't know, post the word we shall not say on YouTube. I just literally cannot even deal with that. They would have had a bowl of pretzels sitting there. Of course, when people eat dry, salty snacks, they're gonna drink more. And the point of the bar is to get people to drink. They wanna make money. And there's nothing drier or more salty than a pretzel. They would have had a really cheap hot dog. I love me a good hot dog. This is not a good hot dog. But this is what the bars would serve. And I actually contacted a friend of mine whose mom used to own a bar, and she said they'd have like a crock pot full of hot dogs in hot dog water. I have like nightmares about someone making me drink hot dog water. Anyway. And they would have had a nasty jar of pickled eggs. I actually remember a couple of places in Salt Lake City that you could go into and they'd have this weird jar of pickled eggs. I don't know why I remember that, probably because it's gross. They're gross. Don't get me wrong, I love pickled anything. I would eat a clod of dirt if you pickled it really well. But there's something about eggs floating in liquid that's just, it's wrong. It's sick and wrong. So of course that's what I'm gonna start with. I love eggs. I already said I love pickled anything, so I like pickled eggs. Just a cheap packet of hot dogs, a little ketchup, a little mustard. I gotta scoop that little hot dog up there. That's what she said. I just took a time machine back to 1985 backyard barbecue, Cedar City, Utah. That's one of the many things I love so much about food. It can transport you, right? I literally can smell the fresh cut grass and see the park kids, the family I grew up next door to, running around on the lawn. That was really a time warp for me. That's kind of cool. Bowl of beer nuts. Let me tell you my beer nut story. When I was a little kid, my grandpa Chamberlain was the math teacher at the junior high, and he was also the referee for all of the high school and junior high basketball games. He was a really active guy, and he was really well known in the community. He also ran the school store at the middle school where he worked. And it was like this little side entrance, not even an entrance. It was like you were walking down the hall, and then there was a roll-up door and a counter. The roll-up door, once it was open, then you could see behind the shelves on all the things that were displayed on the shelves. And there were things like Snickers, fire sticks, Jolly Rancher fire sticks that they don't even make anymore. If they do, somebody send me some of those. And we had jerky, corn nuts, and beer nuts. Those were the things that they sold at the school store, which now looking back as an adult in little rural 1980s small town Utah, I'm surprised they had anything with the name beer on it. It's very, very conservative. So I don't know. That's how I know beer nuts. And yep, those are beer nuts. I have not had those in decades. They're mostly salty. They're a little bit sweet. They're not super flavorful. They mostly are just the peanut, but wow, that is, again, a time machine. Now I want one of those Jolly Rancher fire sticks. Pretzels. They're good. Those are really good. I have to be gluten-free, so anytime I get a little taste of gluten, tastes good. Bar snacks of the 1970s were not anything too special, but it is what it is. It's part of our heritage. It's very American. I think those four foods are a real snapshot of that place in time, right? Roy DeMeo was a monster, and his bar was akin to kind of H.H. Holmes' murder hotel. It was a murder bar. Those guys had it down to a science. They were a killing machine. These are the dark subjects that interest people like us so much, but even monsters have to eat. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death. I sure hope you're well. If you would like to support me, you can like the video and subscribe to my channel, and you can also join my Patreon. One of the biggest reasons I started this channel is in hopes of raising money for cold case DNA storage testing. If you join Patreon, it helps us reach that goal. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.